Hello, I think we are ready to start. I want to apologize for the small delay. We had a little technical problem. First of all, welcome. This is a webinar on the agenda by the European Liberal Forum regarding how we can revolutionize agriculture through technology. I am Elena Baltazzi, I'm the head of communications for the European Liberal Forum. I know that this is a special day. A lot of things are happening in the world, but in the meantime, as a think tank and a network of thinkers and researchers, we do want to invite you to delve into this discussion. I want to welcome our wonderful panelists and of course our moderator, Madame Irène Toléré, Mr. George Morrison, Mr. Nicholas Towell, and of course Sam Morgan, our moderator. Welcome. I wish you a great discussion. Welcome to our audience. Feel free to ask questions. And Sam, please take it away.
Thank you, Elena. Indeed, welcome to everyone who's tuning in today. As Elena said, today's European Liberal Forum event is all about how new, innovative, disruptive technologies can revolutionize our agriculture. Farming is still and will remain, of course, a very important part of society, the economy going forward, but it is faced with a number of huge challenges. Technology offers many solutions to the issues facing the sector, which includes climate change, of course, financial concerns, demographic issues. So we're going to basically discuss today what the state of play is, whether or not these ideas are science fiction, or they're ready to be rolled out, or they're even still being used by farmers already. Are we living through a age of futuristic farmers and advanced agriculturists, or are we not quite there yet? Of course, I can't really tell you much about that. That's why we've assembled a very knowledgeable panel of experts to answer these questions and give us some insights, who I will introduce in just a moment. Just a bit of housekeeping for everyone tuning in today. The session is being recorded. It will be shared on social media and the ELF website in the coming days, so look out for that. It won't just be me asking questions, of course. In the limited time we do have, I invite all of you to ask any pertinent questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, the Q&A box, and we will get to them if we have time, of course. So fire away to those. To introduce our knowledgeable panelists that we have today, we have MEP Irène Toléré. Welcome, Irène. She is a member of the Renew Europe group and also sits on the Regional Development Committee and the Agricultural Committee. So she is extremely well placed to tell us where the EU stands on numerous issues. Welcome, Irène. George Morrison joins us as well. He is Director of Global Public Affairs at Arla Foods, which is a multinational dairy products cooperative. He will be telling us all about his industry and its role in the issues that we're talking about today. And third, we have Nicholas Towell, who is head of carbon at Indigo Europe, which is also an agricultural company that has some exciting projects in the pipeline. We're going to give each panelist 5 or 6 minutes now to tell us their take on this issue and what they see as the most important parts of it. So we'll start with Irène. Irène, over to you. Tell us something interesting.
Thank you very much for this warm hello, and really thank you for the organizer of this event for inviting me. We regularly witness unprecedented and extremely violent climatic phenomena: floods, droughts, fires. In Europe, in America, we have these images every year. We have no choice. Scientists keep telling us that we must take control of global warming. And we know that to do so, we must achieve a carbon neutral economy by 2050. It is important to stress that farmers are the main stakeholders in the fight against climate change. They are also the first victims of extreme weather conditions, and the common agricultural policy does not have effective instruments to protect farmers against those climatic events. Agricultural insurance systems are not always sufficiently responsive nor robust, and they represent an increasingly high cost for producers. So the European Union has embarked on a green transition, which has become the main credo of its future economic transformation. The Green Deal introduces ambitious targets, and the agricultural sector will have to actively contribute to the goal of carbon neutrality. It is therefore important, if we want to achieve the goals, that the European Union equips itself with the means at its disposal to make this economic and environmental shift a reality, even for agriculture. Let us not forget that agriculture is still responsible for 11% of greenhouse gas emissions in the European Union. It is therefore obvious that we must rethink our production model while trying to protect European food sovereignty. The crisis that we have had with COVID and the crisis that starts today really must make us not forget that the first goal of agriculture is to feed us. And so the concept of sovereignty is really more and more every day important in days of political instability at the European Union borders. So it's really extremely important that we support the efforts of European producers to help them make the ecological transition needed so that we reach the targets and that they have a better economic balance with the consequences on climate change on their farms. However, the report that was published last year by the Joint Research Center on Farm to Fork and Biodiversity Strategies clearly shows the negative impact that they can have on production levels. In the context of population growth, we cannot afford to neglect food sovereignty. It is imperative to rely on research and innovation to meet the objectives on the Green Deal while maintaining the competitiveness of our farmers. We need solutions and we need them ASAP, because in addition to climate change, farmers are also facing a huge increase in production costs, mainly due to the current energy crisis. Today, the price of energy and fertilizers already represents up to 20% of farmers' production costs. Farmers also need a level playing field with third countries. The French presidency has put on the table an important debate aimed at ensuring full coherence between the common agricultural policy, the Green Deal, and the trade policy. European farmers cannot make an ecological transition without trade reciprocity in terms of environmental and food safety rules. The idea is not to introduce new barriers to third countries, but to encourage them to raise their environmental ambitions. The European farmers will need to adapt their farming practices. More agroforestry, rotation, cover crops, leguminous, or permanent pastures are needed. I would like to point out that the new carbon credit certification scheme that the European Commission will propose at the end of the year could be a new source of income for farmers. I'm waiting for the proposal, and I hope that all outstanding questions, such as how the system will be monitored and verified, will be answered. But when we talk about new technologies, we should mention genomic techniques that I believe can provide affordable solutions to achieve the Green Deal goals and improve farmers' resilience to climate change, provided the European Union decides to allow them. Many third countries are betting on them, and in the next 10 years, we know that hundreds of products from these new techniques will be commercialized on international markets. Maybe of these products will probably end up on the plates of European consumers. But these new breeding techniques, they are research tools, and these research can have a wide scope. For instance, today, we have learned that the European Food and Safety Agency is going to say, okay, to something that the cows can eat, and when they eat this thing, they reduce their level of methane emission between 30 and 35%. This is the route that we must take: research, innovation, results, and then be as quick as possible to deliver with robust protection of consumers and even consumer information, but making sure that we decrease our green gas emission. But we need to have a rational debate in the European Union on new breeding techniques. We have to counteract the public's distrust of scientific progress in the agri-food sector, or more widely, the public's distrust of scientific progress, full stop. We have all seen what has happened with the COVID-19 vaccination development, and the fact that today we are in the Twitter age, a very complicated matter. Go on Twitter with 280 signs, and we must stop this sort of down the bar conversation and really listen to the science. But listening to the science, of course, is not listening to one study. If we can have 3 independent studies saying the same thing, it will be more robust, because I will make you laugh. Chinese government has just issued a study, quantitative, on 500,000 Chinese, and it says that drinking alcohol is good for COVID. So this study is maybe linked with the fact that they want to keep rice for food and stop rice producing shoshu in China. So we need to trust science, but not blindly. But if we have 3 different studies, we can go for it. So public opinion sees technological development as synonymous with intoxication. It's very, very difficult to change people's minds. So we need science, but we also need to communicate and to make it more easy for people to understand that there is no world complot to put 5Gs on over the planet to control the mind, but we need a 5G for the development of agricultural precision agriculture that can really decrease the impacts of agriculture in Europe. So this topic on NGTs raises important questions. While many third countries are not hesitating to embark on this new technological path, we can wonder about the consequences for European farmers of being excluded from this technological progress. Would European farmers be able to compete with their counterparts in third countries? Wouldn't research go out of European Union if the legislative package is safer outside of the European Union than inside? So digitalization and precision farming are also crucial. They will enable farmers to achieve the EU's environmental goals. Modernization of the agricultural sector is a cross-cutting objective of the new CAP reform. Strategic plan that will come into force in 2023 will have to articulate their contribution to the modernization of the sector through knowledge sharing, innovation, and the promotion of digitalization. Farmers need to identify what they want to achieve and how digital technologies can support this transition. The adoption of digital technology represents a change in farm management that can range from small adjustments in certain activities to major changes depending on how production is organized. In global terms, farmers need to be able to adapt innovative solutions that fit their own business. They need to have information about the technologies available on the market. They then need to identify and evaluate the most appropriate technologies for their needs, have information about the cost and benefits of each tool, and know how to interpret the corresponding cost-benefit analysis. In this process, it is important to know where or to whom they ask quick questions to help formulate decisions. Public administration and producer groups, cooperative, producer organization, could develop initiatives to inform farmers of relevant scientific and technological development to help them make the best business choices. But behind all this thing, my main conclusion is that if we want tech to help agriculture, also need to have change management tools. And for that, we need to implement young farmers, because the young farmers will help the aging farming population in the European Union to learn how to cope with these new tools in farming. So agriculture is not the problem, it's the solution, even with the tech. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. I imagine we'll have many questions for you during the Q&A, which is coming up. Again, to everyone who's listening, put any questions you have in the Q&A box. Moving now to George Morrison. Hi, George, you have 5 minutes or so to tell us your take on these issues. I understand you have a couple of slides to show us as well, so the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Sam. And thank you also to the European Liberal Forum for the invitation today. I think, I guess maybe just given time, I won't share my screen. So I'll just try and talk through a few points. I guess a bit of context to begin with. So I'm representing Arla Foods. We're a dairy cooperative, and we're owned by farmers across 6 different European member states and the UK. And we have about 9,000 farmers, dairy farmers in those countries. We have a responsibility for the majority of the value chain as a cooperative. So basically from farm to fork, where our farmers obviously produce the milk, and we as a processor turn that into goods and then sell it, not just in Europe, but across the world. We've been working in sustainability for quite a long time now, and we have a very broad and holistic sustainability strategy, which covers both the environmental issues around dairy production and consumption, and also the people, so the health and nutrition and societal impacts as well. And one of the things I would like to do in the few minutes that I have left is just to dig into a case study on one of the issues that we're driving through our sustainability strategy, and try and bring out some lessons and what that means for the role of technology and data in sustainable agriculture. And I think basically we're driven by data, not just as a business, as you would expect, but also as a cooperative when it comes to sustainability. So we have over the years built up a number of data points, including through our quality management scheme, which is called Arla Garden, and every farmer has to sign up to that. And that's about standards on milk quality, on labour laws, on health and safety, and also on the way that environment is managed. I think what we've done over the past 5 years or so is look much more strategically at sustainability and the use of data and how we should drive our sustainability decisions and our strategy. And one element of that is an on-farm climate audit that we've rolled out to all of our farmers across Europe. So almost nearly all of the 9,000 farmers have undertaken at least one of these in the past year. And this is a database that we've built up based on questions that the farmer has to fill in, over 200 data points on basically everything that comes into the farm, what's the climate footprint of that, and then the offtake of the milk as well. So we've built up a really strong picture of what the climate footprint of every single one of our farmers is. And there's I think what we've learned over the years is that getting the data is one thing, but making sure it's verified, making sure that it's usable is something else as well. And that's really where you get value from this data. So this climate check model that we've implemented across all the farmers is externally verified, and then we also verify it internally to make sure if there's any outliers that we can understand why that is. And what we've found through that data is that we can calculate the average carbon footprint of a kilogram of milk for Arla, and it's at 1.15 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of milk, which we know is at the top end of the climate efficiency in terms of dairy production. But I think the other thing we've been able to do with this data is identify some of the trends and some of the actions that are required by our farmers to reduce the footprint. So we now have a system in place where we use this data to inform advisors who go out onto the farm and develop action plans with the specific farmer. So every farmer has their own plan in how they can reduce their climate footprint, which is a game changer for us, because one of the limitations, and we can maybe come to this in some of the discussions afterwards, is it's okay to have technology and it's okay to have data, but it's the usability of it. And with our experience in the farm, it's critical that we support the farmer in using those tools to make the right business decisions that will have the biggest effect. One other thing that's come out of the data is actually identifying common actions across farms. So there's very specific actions that individual farms need to take. We actually found 5 big things, 5 actions that all farmers can take, whether they're the most climate efficient or whether they have a longer journey to go. And those come down to 5 different things. It's feed efficiency. It's being very efficient with the use of protein in your animals. It's about animal welfare. It's about fertilizer use as well, and being very specific on your fertilizer use. And it's also about understanding and using your land efficiently as well. So these are things that we've interrogated the data and found that every farmer can do something with them. And this is where it comes to, I think, the key theme here of this this webinar, which is just having that data and having that list of actions is one thing, but we need to make sure that we make available the technologies for our farmers to actually action this as well. And with those 5 levers, there's actually a low amount of investment required, and so we are able as a cooperative to support our farmers quite quickly in using some of these levers to reduce their carbon footprint. So this year we're running the protein efficiency pilot across our farms and helping our farmers understand how they can use mainly software to maximise their protein efficiency in the way that they ration for their cows. So a very practical example. What have we learned from all of this? Well, I think there's three main things around the use of data and it's linked to technology that we've learned in the past few years. I think number one is that data is critical to making the right decision. Incorporating the data and the insights into our business has been invaluable in order to make a strong business case for some of these longer term investments that we are required to make, or our farmers are required to make. I think it's also helps us cut through the noise, and it's busted some myths, to be perfectly honest, around what can and what can't be done. And I think it's given us confidence that the plan that we have to reduce our on-farm carbon emissions by 30% by 2030, and to reduce our scopes 1 and 2, so our supply chain, by 63% by 2030 is robust and is going to work. And that's been verified by the Science Based Target Initiative, who just earlier this year signed our plans off as being in line with meeting the 1.5 degree Paris Agreement limit. So that's the data has how it allowed us to drive that. I think the other thing is, and it's going back to something that I think was mentioned earlier, which is the sequencing of having data, implementing it and then communicating it is really important as well. We're doing a huge number of pilots across our farmers to really test the robustness of some of the hypotheses we have on things like carbon sequestration, on carbon credits for carbon farming, things like that as well. And then finally, I'll just say just 2 more points. Data is allowing us to move from the generic to the specific. That is key for us. It means we target our incentives and the stuff that's going to work. It means we can advise our farmers using the right services and with the right people, and it means that we can identify the right technological solutions. So it's going to be being really specific. Then finally, it's on transparency as well. And it's really important for us that we set benchmarks that are transparent externally, and also that we have peer-to-peer learning. So we make sure our farmers can use their own climate data to compare against similar farm production methods in their own country or even outside the country. And we find that peer-to-peer learning and benchmarking drives a bit of competitiveness in the cooperative, and actually helps stimulate innovation and development of new ideas. So it gives a lot of confidence to invest in the future as well. So Sam, I'll leave it there, just given time.
Thanks, George. That's all extremely interesting stuff. I was just going to ask you before we move on to Nicholas that, I mean, I guess with a lot of EU legislation, you have this gap between what is decided and then what needs to be actioned or implemented. It almost seems like you have sort of established yourself as this link between those two things, where you exist in this system that is subject to these rules, and then you can pass on the emission reduction targets or whatever you think is feasible or doable for the people involved with you. Is that fair to sort of say that you are this bridge almost to the real world and the legislative world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really unique and powerful point about being a cooperative, because so as our cooperative works on the democracy where every farmer has a voice. So on a big decision like, do we roll out the climate audits to all the farmers? That was approved by our board of representatives, which is farmers. Mm-hmm. So it took 2 years to get there. But once the cooperatives made the decision, we know that there's 9,000 farmers behind that initiative, so we can scale up really quickly. Mm-hmm. I think there's no discussion now about why do we need to do this. The discussion in the cooperative is about how do we do it. And I think there's a real role there for sensible policy to facilitate that. That's not always the case, and maybe we can pick that up in the Q&A. It's not always the case, but it's really important that our farmers are getting the right incentives from regulation and authorities, as much as the consumers sending signals down the value chain as well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, George. Now, that point about the marriage between democracy and innovation, I think is probably a good one that people need to keep in mind. Moving on now to Nicholas Towell. It's your turn. Give us your 5-6 minutes about what Indigo Europe is up to and your take on these issues as well. Over to you, Nicholas.
Thanks, Sam. Good afternoon. So it's really exciting to be here today, and thanks for this opportunity. And I want to share which is Indigo Agriculture's perspective on how technology can play a critical role in this transition to climate smart agriculture here in Europe, but more broadly as well. Because we at Indigo believe that the transition will lead to a more resilient and sustainable food and agriculture system, as I mentioned before, here in Europe, but more globally as well. And we do this in Indigo through nature-based solutions as well as digital technologies. Our biointrinsic seed portfolio is an example of that, where we use naturally occurring microbiomes to protect crops from stress. But also we have what we call our Market Plus platform, which is an integrated grain merchandising solution. But those aside, today it's really about carbon farming and talking about that topic, and we at Indigo call that Carbon by Indigo. And I believe this can play a critical role in enabling and rewarding farmers in making this transition to climate smart agriculture. By adopting regenerative agricultural practices, or what's commonly called climate smart or sustainable agricultural practices, farmers can do two big things. One is obviously reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, as George was referring to, but also to draw down and store carbon dioxide in the soil through practices which, again, Irene mentioned, including cover crops, tillage, no tillage, reduced inputs, and diversification of crop rotations as an example. And there will obviously be clear agronomic benefits for farmers, like reduced erosion or improved water filtration. But today I really want to look at it from a carbon perspective. And the simple reason being that it's essential that any benefits are properly accounted for from a carbon perspective. And that's why we at Indigo have worked so hard over the last few years to contribute to the development of what we believe are two groundbreaking methodologies. The first through the Climate Action Reserve, or CAR, which is more US based, and then Vera using the VCS standard, which we'll use more outside of the US. And these methodologies are unique in being able to quantify the overall reductions of greenhouse gas emissions, but also importantly, the increase in soil organic carbon storage through the adoption of the practices that I mentioned earlier and Irene did as well. These methodologies use a dual approach. So we spoke a lot about modeling or calculations today, but then there are also ground truths using soil sampling, or a selective amount of soil sampling. Carbon by Indigo leverages this dual approach, both to drive down costs, but for the full value chain from farmer to us and partners, but also ensuring that as we drive the cost down, accuracy still goes up, so we can provide the maximum reward for the growers at the same time. And technology plays a key role in this. And just one example for now is around remote sensing solutions, which we use to perform routine verification exercises and gap filling. But we're also looking at new proximal and remote sensing solutions for soil sampling and other technologies as well. And I think data has been mentioned quite a few times today, and carbon programs also at this stage are quite data heavy, and Indigo Carbon is no exception. Farmers need to sign up and enroll their eligible fields, provide electronic field boundaries. They need to implement the practice changes. But then there's this process of submitting historical baseline data, which can be up to 5 years of field management practice data. But this helps us set that the dynamic baseline against which we model emission reductions and removals. And then obviously on an annual basis, there's a need to provide what happened in the field, what crops were grown, how the fields were prepared, what was planted, harvest activities, and again, as mentioned today, fertilizer applications. Then our models work through a plethora of different mathematical equations to calculate the actual outcome for each individual field based on that provided data. But I think it's probably fair to say that there are still a lot of very legitimate questions about the robustness for potential soil carbon farming and sequestration in both European and global soils. But I think as far as we're concerned at Indigo, the standards and rules around carbon farming need to be as robust and unimpeachable as possible. This means, amongst other things, we need to look at things like realness, ensuring a complete model or calculation of greenhouse gases. Looking at additional, we need to ensure that we don't reward for business as usual or mandated practices. We've spoken about verification a lot today. So how do we manage verification using registry approved methodologies? And the very critical topic and controversial topic of permanence. So how do we ensure that the impact will remain for a long time to come? Now, farmers are going to engage in these programs for the clear agronomic benefits that they bring, but what do we do about the fiscal incentives to transition to low carbon agriculture? And we look at it as two ways, or two immediate ways. The first one, I think, was similar to the way Arla looks at it, is around low carbon grain, where you're rewarding farmers for a price premium for the grain that they're growing. You're applying an attribute to a physical crop. But then there are carbon farming credits and offsets where companies can purchase or governments can purchase these emissions to offset their unavoidable emissions. We've been working with companies like Anheuser-Busch, North Face, Vasa, which is part of the Barilla Group, on these low carbon crop pilots and projects. But we also have diverse companies like Barclays, Shopify, Rolf Lauren, also being out there pre-purchasing the first verified carbon farming credits, which we intend to have verified over the next few weeks, months. And here in Europe, it is really encouraging to see the European and obviously the member states getting behind carbon farming. The new CAP, particularly through eco schemes, offers the opportunity to support growers in making this transition. And at the same time, it enables the growers to capture the upside, the price premiums or the credits that reward them for the outcomes that they have delivered. I think Irene mentioned it as well, but also welcoming the Commission's undertaking to establish a robust regulatory framework for carbon removals. And we hope this will ensure that the highest standards will be there for things like I mentioned before, realness, additionality, verification, but also double count. But in conclusion, I think we've mentioned it, Irene mentioned a lot today, that this climate emergency is real. We need to employ all the solutions at our disposal. Reducing on-farm greenhouse gases and expanding carbon sinks, I believe, is too good an opportunity to miss. And we hope that our efforts and our technology in this area will really help revolutionize agriculture in this area. And we really don't want to ensure that we want to ensure that we do not miss this opportunity. So thanks for the time. Thanks for the platform, and let's get into some Q&A, right, Sam?
Thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, I have one immediately for you, really. When you explain this product, this idea, this innovation to actual farmers, what is the main either concern they have about the not even the science, but the purpose of it? Is it that they don't understand the need for it? Is it they have concerns about the time resources or financial resources they would need to devote to it? I mean, what are the actual things that the mindsets maybe that exist that you need to get over?
I think it's a bit of all of them. As we've said, by the nature of carbon credits and the need to secure permanence, it's difficult to have a conversation with a grower around talking about the maintenance of practices for so long to ensure that the benefit remains in the soil. So that there's a difficult conversation there. There is the piece that they need to trigger something new and something different. So we often get the question from farmers who have been doing this for many years as to why they cannot partake in a carbon crediting program. But it comes back to this definition of additionality and ensuring that new things and additional practices are taken out. But I think, Sam, probably to finalize that question, yes, it does come down to economics, right? At the end of the day, the farmer does need to generate economic benefit through agronomics, but ultimately they're looking for the cherry on the top. They're looking for that kicker that the carbon farming credit brings. And at this point in time, that equation between effort, activity, cost for the grower is not quite at this stage outweighed by the carbon credit benefit that they would be accrued through adoption of these practices. And it's up to Indigo and similar companies ours to try and create that incentive in a molded way, in a complementary offer that really helps the growers adopt, maintain, and receive the benefit from these practice changes.
Thanks, Nicholas. Just to remind everyone watching that I'm not the only one that gets to ask questions in this forum, in this webinar, remember, so put any that you have in the Q&A. Elaine, if I could just turn to you, you are obviously probably the best place of everyone here to speak about the European Union's legislation on all of these issues, the common agricultural policy. It's effectively all written and signed for the update and the reform of this. As you said, next year it's all going to come into action. Do you think that there are enough incentives, enough money, basically, in the new CAP to incentivize innovations to make agriculture better? Or do you think that there is still a gap between what is needed and what will be given by member states, by the EU budget, and so on? Are you happy with where the CAP is basically going forward?
Okay, I will answer yes and no very forcibly. So yes, I'm happy with the CAP and the reform, and I think it's a massive improvement compared to what we had. But no, it will not have enough money for something that was not part of the negotiation and the deal. And that is something that we really need to be crystal clear about. The Green Deal strategy and the Farm to Fork strategy, these objectives, they were defined and adopted and voted after the pact was already defined and sought. So when the budget of the CAP was done, it was not for that. So if we want to go quick, we need more money, and to be able to convince the farmers, we also need to size what are the implications for them on their farms. Because if we ask farmers to do little changes that bring a lot of gas reduction, they will do it. But if we ask farmers to really make massive investments in things that maybe will not work, then there is a problem of time discrepancy between the moment when we help them fund the change and the moment that they reap the benefits. I will give a very simple example: tractors. At the moment, farmers, the way the tractors are moving in the European Union is we have big, powerful tractors, and we put big, powerful tools on these big, powerful tractors, which means that at the moment, these tractors, they work with fossil fuels. And we already have experiments with tractors with electric batteries, but they don't have enough power. That means that if we launch a public policy saying to the farmers, you need to change your tractor, in fact, the farmers, he will go to visit the tractor, but if he believes in us, then he will buy the tractor, and then he will be in a very dire straits because all his tools will not work on this specific tractor. So that means that the true thing that we should say is that we should get rid of all the fossil fuel tractors and tools and replace them by electricity driven or CO2 neutral driven tractors. But maybe we don't have enough power, and maybe we are not talking about tractors anymore, but robots. So the change is that when you buy a tractor, you can buy an old tractor between 5,000 and 10,000 euro. And when you buy a very expensive fossil fuel tractor, it's 100,000 euro. But if you want to buy an electric tractor and be stuck in your vineyard because you cannot finish your treatment, it's 350,000 euro. And I know very rich chateaus that have bought one electric tractor and they are not going to buy a second one. They are going to show. And so we really need to understand that that's the way the agricultural farms are working. I think that farmers are the first victim of the climate change. So they are really into changing their practices. But if we bring dubious solutions, they will not go for it. And especially if budget-wise, the incentives are not enough. So the carbon credits and making an economic model is very important, but also we need to protect the European Union against third country practices. So yes, we need to secure the morale of our farmers so that they take on with the change, and we need to have the money with the size of the ambition. So first of all, what is the size of the change needed in terms of money, and then where do we find this money from?
Thanks, Hélène. George, just turning to you. I mean, you mentioned data a lot in your opening statement. Is it fair to say, like, over the next 10 years, when it comes to EU rules, I mean, we saw this week the new Data Act from the Commission. Obviously, that will have to be agreed and everything by the member states and by members of the European Parliament. Is it fair to say that rules that govern data will be as important as common agriculture policy, for example, for companies like you in the next 10 years? And if the European Union doesn't get it right, either it's too restrictive or it doesn't incentivize into innovation, that's going to be a huge problem.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, Sam. I think there's a couple of elements to it. I think number one is on transparency, that in the discussion we have around how do we engage consumers in the climate debate and in making sustainable choices through diets, in our case, deciding on which dairy to have. We need to be able to discuss that with consumers, and data is at the heart of that. And I think there's a tangled nest of databases and reference points on how you sort of quantify, LCAs or product environmental footprints, and so actually the rules around data and how we use it is imperative to that as well. Is how do you untangle that, and how do you communicate with consumers, because it goes all the way back to the farm. And at the moment, as an example, we have a lot of data on our farmers, which we hold in the individual farmer owns that data. We can use it for certain purposes, but we cannot make it available outside of the cooperative. Not that we would want to, but we can anyway. But I think there is a challenge there, because we are not going to be the only organisation that builds these databases up. And if we're looking at how do we inform the development of a consumer label, how do we inform a national inventory database, we're getting to the stage where we have live data from production, which wasn't the case before in the same extent. I think that it's maybe not how do we protect the data, but it's how do we make sure we use it correctly, that we can get the full value out of it as well, because ultimately the benefit is when the consumer can make informed choices based on the value chain of data all the way back to the farm as well. Don't know if that answered the question. But
no, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the point you made about how different farmers in different countries should, or if they do already, be able to compare their working practices or best practices, this kind of thing. I guess if the system the EU is building doesn't incentivize that or make it possible, the whole ethos of green farming or smart farming is not it's going to get to a ceiling and not get any further right, basically. Yeah, absolutely. I think in the cooperative we have quite unique structures in how we share that data, and obviously it's anonymized at a farm level, but being able to cut the data in different ways, so we can, if you're an organic farmer, you can compare against organic farmers. If you've got
a large herd you can compare against a large herd. If you use bought-in feed versus producing it yourself, that management of that data is really, really important to get a really accurate picture of what's going on and to benchmark. And yes, legislation and regulation needs to support that as well.
I mean, Nicholas, turning back to you now, you said about how Indigo is obviously active, not just in Europe, in the US as well, if I'm right in saying that. With the European Commission coming out with this carbon credit verification proposal later this year, that seems like it will be a big part of the puzzle for you guys. I think we all know how the EU kind of works quite slowly with a lot of things. Proposals can take a long time to go from design to implementation. Do you find that the EU's regulatory framework space kind of stifles your innovation a little bit? You find it easier to launch new products or new mindsets in the States, for example, or another part of the world? Or do you find that the EU gives you that certainty to go a bit further, shall we say? I mean, how do you balance those two things?
I would say at this point in time that in terms of the programs that we're trying to set up, we're absolutely not stifled at all by the policy frameworks that exist. And in effect, I think the European Union is being quite progressive in putting out this document and setting up a committee to ensure that the regulatory framework is well documented. Everybody understands that it meets the rules around whether it be additionality or permanence. So in some ways, I would say it's the other way around. We see it as a huge tailwind for us, not a headwind, being able to see what it is that the European Commission is putting out. And as I said in my little 6 minutes as well, we really welcome the Commission's regulatory framework piece that they're planning and putting out. I think Irene, you said the end of the year, but I thought it was more to the middle of the year, but sometime in H2, they're planning on putting this out. We're obviously actively involved and will remain actively involved in this and applying the learnings that we have with our many, many hectares signed up in the US. But Sam, I would say we're encouraged by it and think it will be tailwinds for our business, not headwinds.
No, that's good to know. Elaine, I just want to turn to you quickly. I know you have to leave in 3 minutes, so I'll just ask you one last question. You mentioned about genome techniques, new plant breeding techniques, this kind of thing that needs to be removed from the sort of public mindset that already exists. Do you think what needs to be done for that to happen? Do we need a crisis for this to happen? Sometimes this happens in the energy sector where people need to have a wake-up call for things to change, or do you think it's just a matter of education, or how do you go about doing that, basically, is my question to you.
Okay, here I am the politician, and I'm afraid to say that some politicians are making political views on scientific facts. So we need to come back to the scientific facts and explain and explain and explain. And I must admit that I was really very innocent when I arrived at the European Parliament, so I had no preconceived ideas. I did my job. I met a lot of scientists, and then I understood completely the problem of discrepancy between European laws and laws outside of the European Union, and the risk that that was happening for the European farmers and European consumers. And so I started to get vocal with my small scale and explaining and explaining and explaining. And I think that genomic techniques are not the only solution, but they are part of the solution. And they are also the embodiment of solutions that I hope we will have more and more and more, which means that research has found something new. So basically what we have to deal with new genomic techniques is innovation. So how do we in Europe make sure that when we put a lot of money on Horizon 2020 to find things, when we find them, can we authorize them quickly and after develop their usage quickly inside the European Union and even better elsewhere? The COVID crisis for me is the epitome of the quality that the European Union can bring as a response, when we want to do it, when it's not a political subject, but it's a general interest subject. The beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, when we started vaccinating, every country had difficulty getting vaccines. Why? Because we didn't have vaccine factories. We didn't have vaccine supply chain factories inside the European Union. Now, we are the first producer of vaccine, we are the first exporter of vaccine, and we have the first donator of vaccine. Reason why is we have more than 55 factories that produce COVID-19 vaccines in Europe. So my only wish is that with new genomic techniques and with the innovations that are being searched at the moment and that do not have yet a name, that we have learned from the COVID-19 crisis, and that we will be able to put on the table that we are talking about global warming, and that all the innovations that make us really get a better chance to meet the Green Deal objective and climate neutrality, then we must go for it. And if we reach the goals before 2050, it's better. And if the tools that we find, legalize, and develop to reach that in Europe can help the rest of the planet, it's all the better for everybody. So I think that we need to make the difference between science and politics, and we need to have politicians that have courage and that explain that science is science.
Fantastic. Merci beaucoup, Irene. I'll let you go now. And,
sorry, I have to leave. Thank you. It was a great pleasure for me, and thank you for the other speakers. It was very good talking with you, and let's keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. Turning to both you, both the remaining speakers now, Nicholas and George. I have a bit of a question that's sort of linked to both of you, I guess. First to you, George, the sort of the structure of a cooperative, shall we say, and you said about the access that you have to data and this sort of democratic process that you can engage in to make decisions and make them long lasting. Does that mean that you are probably best placed to deploy technologies such as the one that Nicholas has outlined to us? You know, you are sort of the test beds, if you will. You're better suited than just individual farmers being asked to make financial outlays, time and resource commitments, so on and so forth.
So I think it's a good question. I guess there's no simple answer to that one, Sam, because we have, as a cooperative, we're a cooperative of 9,000 farmers, but they're all individual businesses as well. So I think it's about getting the balance right and finding out where the scale that we can bring as Arla will shift the dial as well. So we have many farmers within the cooperative who are doing their own, speeding ahead with their own initiatives, investing in the technology that they need for their own farm, on top of what we are doing as a collective as well. So I think it's about getting that balance right. But I guess what we found is that when we go into something as a cooperative, because we have the farmers behind us on this, we can make a difference, and we can, whether it's about gathering data or trying pilots out or actually deploying a new technology or an initiative, we can make a difference, and we can do it across several member states. I think it's about a balance of trying to get that right and allowing our farmers to work on their own business and make their own decisions, as well as working for the sort of greater good within the cooperative as well.
I mean, if we take the example of carbon farming, Nicholas, what is the thing that kind of unlocks this? Is it scale or is it experience? Farmers actually getting used to thinking along the lines of using this technology, or is it about getting as many people to use it as possible? So I assume costs come down, or it becomes basically a part of the philosophy of farming, shall we say?
I think it's a combination of both. We look at it in terms of breadth and depth, right? We need to be able to get the breadth of farmers involved in the program, and once we've got the breadth, then we can start heading down the depth and making sure that we entrench practices. And I think it really comes from different practices result in different levels of sequestration and reduction. So how do we meet farmers where they're at, right? What is the challenge that they're facing, and what is the practice that's going to help them solve their challenge? not necessarily what is it that's going to drive additional revenue opportunities on sequestered carbon or abated emissions. So for me, it's around meeting farmers where they're at, starting with practices that they understand, that they can implement and are cost effective. For example, nitrogen reduction at this point in time is a good thing to follow. And then meet them where they're at when it comes to cover crops. It's not natural to everyone in the world. Driving no-till equipment is not natural to everyone in the world. So how do you ensure that you meet them with the challenges that they have and layer up more as they get more comfortable with what it is that they are doing at that point in time?
Mm-hmm. And just turning back to you, George, I guess one last question, as we are unfortunately right up against the time limit, as per usual. In terms of big milestones that people think about in Brussels, shall we say, 2030 climate targets, climate neutrality by 2050, these big things that are important, but not necessarily maybe, an everyday piece of knowledge. Do you find that, your farmers are conscious of these kind of targets? Is there this gap between, the big legislation and what people are actually driving forward? Or is it more a case of, the bottom line is a profit has to be made, or, costs have to be met? That's a secondary consideration. What's the actual feeling amongst people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's much more in line now than it was 5 years ago, definitely. I mean, we committed to carbon net zero in 2019, March 2019. We were one of the first global dairies to do that. That was a decision taken by the cooperative. So, and then since then, what we've done is added more, I guess, meat to the bone. So we have a 2030 target, which is the science-based targets that I talked about earlier. So I think that conversation within the cooperative has been going on for a number of years now. I think where the challenge is that sometimes the public rhetoric, the political debate, is seems a bit divorced from the action that's actually happening. Mm. So our farmers are doing a lot and know they're doing a lot and investing a lot in their businesses to meet those targets that we've set as a cooperative, but also that we need as society. And then you look outside of the industry, and there's this momentous discussion going on whether farming is part of the solution or part of the problem. And I think it's pretty clear that the farmers are on board to do this. Absolutely on board. We see that within our farmers as well. So I don't think the disconnect's not around the targets. It's certainly not around the ambition. It's about the reality of what's actually happening on farm versus perhaps some of the perceptions that's entering into the political debate, which is driving policy. And that in turn comes back into the farming community and undermines confidence in the business, because it does come down to a bottom line as well. The good news is, in many cases with sustainability action, there's an economic saving there as well in some cases. So efficiencies help. So yeah, I think it's complicated, but I'd really like to see those two worlds coming a bit closer together, and reality being part of the discourse.
It does seem a bit like almost self-fulfilling negativity almost. You talk something down and it will go down almost. Many thanks to both of you for joining this webinar. As always, when there's something interesting to talk about, there's never enough time. And also thank you to Irene for tuning in for the time that she had, and also to everyone who tuned in to watch us talk about this discussion. I'd just like to remind everyone that ELF does these webinars quite regularly. The next one is about smart cities, I believe, towards the end of March. So watch out for the website for that. Otherwise, it just leaves me to say again, thank you to our panelists for a very interesting discussion. Still lots to talk about, I'm sure. And to everyone, have a great day and stay safe out there. And goodbye for now.